So round the corner here, it has the last letter from this man's grandfather here, but he wrote it as the blood ebbed out of his body and was denied medical attention here. So I want to introduce you to the legend that is Princess Rana.
Promotion, they kindly came in and assisted us at a moment's notice. And I want to give a warm welcome to Marcus Howard there in front of us, Easter Rising Stories. When things were looking rough on the street here, back in the Heather Humphreys disastrous days, my colleague and comrade, James Connolly, Heron, was going off to America. And he told me, I said to him, when are you heading off to America? He says, I'm going over there to give a lecture about our stance on Moore Street and that this government has just literally turned a blind eye to our history, which is a disgrace. That's the only word I can say. It's a disgrace. And nowhere else in the world would you have a government turn their backs and wait literally for this historic area and the houses where, through the sacrifice of our brave forefathers, is to hope that they will fall and hit the ground. Basically, that's what's going on. But I said to Jim, there is no way you're going over there empty-handed. So I rang Marcus, and I asked Marcus, would he get his camera and himself and his boat down here to Moore Street, and I asked Jim, would he get up in the morning early, and we got down here, and between the quicks and the bends, Marcus pulled it off, and Jim and I narrated the whole history here. It's like a camera on our shoulders all around here, and gave the history of the whole area. And this is what was the end product. And that was produced, that documentary, Battlefield 1916, in less than 1 week, 5 days. I mean, it's incredible. And it really was a great achievement, Marcus, and I salute you. And I have a little bit of a tale to tell you about that. During the court case, needless to say, when Jim went over and showed this to the diaspora in America, in Chicago, they wanted to come back there and buy the place. They were so horrified. But during the court case, the High Court case, which Heather Humphreys went along and disgracefully appealed 2 years afterwards, put the place back again when he came back in. And apparently he did look at it before he made his judgment, and his judgment was 400 pages long. And he actually came down here himself and walked the whole area on the prosecutor's say-so, hoping that it would go the opposite direction, which it didn't, needless to say. Now, I have written, I'd hate to tell you how many letters I have written, and I won't bore you with them, but I'll just read this out. There was 3 major events that happened here. The one was the land swap deal. And the land swap deal was, this property here was belonging to DCC, and they wanted to swap it for number 16, the National Monument, which is there today. So Jim and I went down to the city hall, and they were having a vote, and a motion was placed that night. And we stopped it anyway, and we won the vote that night. And the mayor at the time was very disappointed it didn't go through, along with his councillor sidekick, who ended up a mayor here as well. And that same man, I found out afterwards, and he announced it on radio when he was a mayor, that he was fully backing the Hammerson plan. And this man never ceases to tell people about his 4 great-granduncles. You couldn't make it up. You just couldn't. So there have been a good few around, well, not a good few, but there have been a few around through the whole campaign that were running with the hares and the hounds, unknown to us. And in fact, I mean, and the other thing that came out of this is that Jim and I then founded the only annual commemoration that happens up in the Garden of Remembrance on Easter Saturday, as we wanted the relatives to gather there and pay homage to those very great forebears and fathers of ours that fell and gave up everything, sacrificed everything, so that we could be free. Today, the Republic. Of course, that was how exactly well, whatever, that's another day's work. Basically, you all know the story of Moore Street, and in 2000, I think it was just shortly after Hedda Humphreys, just before she gave I think Jim was big into this, she gave a promise, her word, back in 2015, that the National Monument would be completed and totally renovated with the centenary year. I'm just shaking my head here in disbelief and in anger. Just look at it. Just look at it. I was talking to Jimmy Deehan only yesterday. I rang, it was a wrong number I rang, it was Jimmy, and he said, will you hurry up, he said, I'm on the way to Ballybunion to have my swim. I didn't tell him, great. But he helped us, so he knew the importance of holding on to the National Monument. But Jimmy said to me, he just asked me, is the museum up yet? And I said, what? Didn't you open it? I thought he was referring to the museum of the GPO. No. It was a museum here in the National Monument. I said, nothing's been done to that. And he says, where's my 5 million? Where's the 5 million I gave to Humphreys? Where is it? And nobody knows where it is. And then I questioned Humphreys, where is the whole interiors of those 4 houses, which were skipped, basically? When you open up the shutter of those 4 houses where the 5 leaders had their last council of war, I mean, it's just an eggshell inside, and it's just held up with girders, and nothing has been done. And so this is a sacred, consecrated ground for me personally, as my grandfather leading a charge here, which was the first evacuation from the GPO, was hit there on the far side of the street with the first bullet he was hit. And he hit the cobblestones with his sword, and he managed to pull himself up after making the sign of the cross. And he made his way down here, and he hit on the doorway that side first. But when he put out his head to see where the back of his men were, he was riddled by a machine gun which was placed there at the end of the street there, from his hip right up to his neck. And he dragged himself around the corner here to Kelly's door, which is the Kelly shop inside. And he managed to take out his Greek pen, which he always carried with him, and wrote on the back of a note that his own son had written into him earlier during the week with the GPO. And that note was sent out to 40 Hereford Park, which I'll get into in a minute. And that note was unveiled and put up there, that plaque, and unveiled by my late aunt in 2005. I think it's one of the most moving notes I've ever written. And there was a British sentry here on the street, and he was told not to leave anyone down that street. And I mean anyone, he couldn't. And he did ask his superior officer why. And it must be an important pastor, he said, because they wanted to bleed to death. And that's what happened. And he was shot at 6 o'clock, ripped open by that Maxim. I think it was around 6:30 on a Friday night. He was still moving on the Sunday morning. Just incredible, long, slow death. So the lane there was Sackville Lane, that was renamed after him. Now, this government, I just don't know. They seem to be absolutely away with the fairies. They're not in touch with reality when it comes to this area. This would not be allowed to happen anywhere else in the world. Anywhere. As an American said to me the other day, this is your animal. Well, it is in a way, it really is. This is where our republic was born. And these cobbles, especially around the corner, are sacred cobbles. Harry Coyle, will you come up here a second, please? And Brendan Mulvihill. In 2015, I decided to form a group with both Harry Coyle here and Brendan Mulvihill, and we called it the Moore Street, Relatives Moore Street Initiative Group. And the reason I did that was the three of us lost our grandfathers on the street. So, as I say, these are sacred cobbles, so we have a very, very strong link to this area. Harry's grandfather was with my grandfather on that charge, and Brendan, his relative, he was killed around the corner there. Harry, do you want to say a word there?
I won't even intend to add to anything because my friend here has been saying, but just that we're glad of the support that we're getting finally for the thing. I mean, what it would cost to do what Francine is talking about is a drop in the bucket compared to saying the wasteful excessive the current government are spending. And it would also pay for itself in the long run. But it's a shame that it's taken so long. Hopefully we will finally achieve some measure of success, mainly through the efforts of West Coasters and James and other. I want to thank all the support.
Thank you, Harry. Okay, but that's it. So that's why I founded the Moore Street Initiative.
What's this for, Herman? What's this for?
Now, getting back to the government of the state, I mean, I discovered that the whole new meeting was corrupted. Happens inside Leinster House. When my grandfather's house, having died for the country, planned the rising in his house, planned both gun rings in the house, Cumann and Mom were founded in the house in 40 Herbert Park. 3 presidents, Irish presidents, visited the house, along with all of the signatories of the proclamation, along with many, many, many more. So that house played a pivotal role in the foundation of this state. And that house, this is a photograph of the house I think it was a year before it was demolished at dawn illegally by the Fianna Fáil developer who owns the hotel next to it. And if you see that window there, my grandfather's office was in that, and this was the bush, and the gate was down there. So he kept that clip so he could see whether it was friend or foe at the gate. But Michael Collins walked in through that door. Michael Martin didn't know this apparently at the time. Michael Collins, Taoiseach, your hero, walked in through that door. Taoiseach, your hero, was at 16 upstairs. Were you aware of that, Taoiseach? So he was, I was very angry because I had been on to Darrell O'Brien for 2 years previous, worried about what was going to happen to the house. I could see what was happening, but the house was being vandalized as I thought. And I went to the guards, and the guards said to me, go back to the minister. I went back to the minister, and the minister said, I can't do anything about it. I can't do anything about it. I said, why not? And he says, well, he sent me this text, and the text reads, hi, Prunchius, haven't seen the emails, we'll have a look. Heritage hasn't formally transferred to me yet. Will be a few weeks, catch up very soon. And that was dated 5 weeks after he was given the seal of heritage and the portfolios of heritage and housing up in the Oris. So it must have been his ghost up there. And he stayed down in the custom house while all this was going on and never got involved, which was a total disgrace. And the original planning given to knock that house was by our friend who is charged in Board Flanold. I mean, you couldn't make it up. But worse was to come. Micheál here, Micheál, who was there a minute ago, Micheál McDonagh, put a motion to the City Council that the house should be listed. So it was, the motion went through unanimously by all the elected councillors. Incredible. So I let a sigh of relief. So the chief executive, Owen Keegan Esquire, was at the meeting and he rang Herbert Park Hotels and the developers to say to them, by the way, I'm just letting you know that the vote has gone through, that the house will be listed. Incredibly, the developers came back to him and said, we're going ahead with the demolition in 7 days' time. Gave him the date. That man withheld that vital information, Mr. Keegan Esquire. Never brought it back to the elected members, the rest of the councillors. Hence, they knocked the house at dawn on that day. I mean, his pension should have been taken on, it should have been thrown out. But that is the sort of corruption that you're dealing with. Now, on the morning of the demolition of the house, I'm just leaving Moore Street for a minute just to give you an idea of what's going on behind closed doors. On the morning that that house was demolished, I think it was Padder Tobin confronted the Taoiseach in the Dáil, asked him what was going on, and he made this statement in the Dáil, which was the Times letter, it was the headline in the Times newspaper the following day. Home of the O'Rahilly should not have been demolished, the Taoiseach said. This is what rotating Micheál Martin says. And he uses the word iconic and historic locations such as this should be preserved or incorporated, Martin says. 6 weeks later, literally to the day, rotating Micheál Martin, who loves Collins, loves Irish history, stands down in Bale na Blá, shouting out how great these volunteers were that gave their lives for this country. Goes and meets Hammerson, the very crowd that want to knock this place here. Hammerson shakes their hands in the secret meeting in government buildings and fully supports them in their plan to destroy the terrace here behind. And that is Micheál Martinfield. And I mean, to me, you couldn't make that sort of stuff up. Now, I could go on, but I won't. But that film I was talking about earlier that Marcus kindly did for us, I feel that should be part of the school's curriculum. Because when I go down the country and I ask people about Moore Street, they say to me, oh yeah, that's the place where the vegetables and the bananas and the oranges of the traders are. They know nothing about the history. You know, absolutely, they look at me, they just can't believe it. But now, I'm going to hand you over to, I just wanted to before I go, I'm sorry for boring you, I hope I'm not. This is a timeline that I think everybody should know. In 1690, we had the Battle of the Boyne. In 1773, Moore Street, where you're standing, was completed. 1773. The Custom House, where Darragh O'Brien hid, was built in 78.